Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining the conversation. This is our first in a series of conversations with moderation leaders from across the online world. And we're joined, of course, today by Aaron Rodericks of Bluesky. He will speak with us about his platform's decentralized approach to content moderation. And mod counselors will have a chance to consider Bluesky's successes and setbacks to develop our own thoughts about the future of moderation at Reddit. I'll try to give a brief summary, but and will be able to correct all of my misinformation since he's in content moderation. But as I understand it, Bluesky began life as a research project at Twitter under the leadership of the then CEO Jack Dorsey. And after Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter, Bluesky was spun off into a fully independent public benefit corporation, and it was quickly hailed, in the media at least, as a potential Twitter killer. Bluesky describes itself as a defederated federation built on the open standard authenticated transfer protocol, or AT protocol, and it aspires to create an online environment where users can choose who moderates the content they see, where users can exercise algorithmic choice to design and share their own feeds, and where users can leave a platform without losing their networks of connections. We'll be talking about how well Bluesky has fulfilled these lofty ambitions and where it is still finding its way. Some of the questions that I hope we'll touch on is, have users actually embraced these freedoms, or have they remained comfortable with existing models that transfer effort and responsibility to central authorities? Have Bluesky's tools created healthier online experiences, or have they fragmented moderation? And probably most of all for us, what lessons and cautionary tales can we draw from Bluesky's experiences to shape the future of content moderation at Reddit? During the first half hour with Aaron, we will discuss his work at Bluesky, and during the second half hour, our colleague Apono will select questions and comments from our group to put to him. So please send her your questions and comments via the Zoom chat thread, and she will read them to Aaron, unless you place an emoji at the start of your text to indicate that you would like to speak yourself. Aaron is head of trust and safety at Bluesky. Immediately before joining Bluesky, he was co-lead of Twitter's trust and safety section with a special interest in protecting election integrity. His 13 years as a federal public servant have given him strong insights into the public policy architecture in which online platforms operate. And my sense is that it has also given him a healthy skepticism about the efficacy of government regulation of the sector. He joined us from, I'm going to guess, from Ottawa, or the Ottawa Valley.
Montreal today,
Montreal,
but
okay.
You're not entirely wrong in that I was in Ottawa last week.
Okay, so and welcome to the Reddit Mod Council, and thank you for joining us.
Clearly, the real star of the show is in the next window, so I'm just a distraction here from Kitty Collar.
Okay. Well, I've done my best to frame the discussion with a thumbnail sketch of Reddit of Bluesky, but go ahead and put me to shame. Tell us what Bluesky really is.
I think what you said captured it well. Let's oversimplify at a high level and then dive into the details, and we can dig in wherever folks are interested. So Bluesky came into being, yes, out of this idea that centralized platforms were failing as we scaled up. Having been at Twitter for 5 years, I've certainly seen the trade-offs and limitations with that approach, and we were looking for new answers. So this AT Proto, the protocol was designed to be the architecture for Twitter. Obviously, that changed in terms of the direction of the company overall. So then Bluesky came in and instituted a reference, or the company itself created a reference app. The app also being called Bluesky. And this was to show, hey, we've built an underlying protocol. The underlying protocol is kind of useless unless we can show how it works in reality. So we built Bluesky, the app. And so most of the attention has been to Bluesky, the app, but there's this kind of underlying tension and trade-off as we try to further and advance the protocol and decentralized technologies writ large. where it implicates moderation. So there's a huge amount in the technical stuff. I'm just going to pitch it to the side because I'm not really qualified or capable on this front. But where it becomes interesting is when we talk about moderation. So what does Blue Sky do? Blue Sky, I mean, let's be honest, has been largely me, myself, and I in terms of trust and safety. And I took it from about 2.7 million users to about 35 million users, not just 35 users. That would have been easier. And during that time, we had a fluctuating number of internal moderators as we got slammed with the US election, et cetera. And as a result, we brought in some outsourcing capabilities. But overall, we're roughly stable internally with roughly around 100 moderators. So just to give you an idea of what our architecture is, one person in trust and safety, roughly 100 moderators. Recently, I've gone and added 2 other people to the company as we have a smidgen more resources. But at the end of the day, the company is still pre-revenue. We have no monetization model. The wildest commercial success we had was Jay walking on stage with a shirt that everyone wanted to buy. So we sold a bunch of shirts to people who wanted to buy the shirts, but that's not exactly a revenue model since we're not a t-shirt company. So with that being said, what does moderation do? Moderation tries to give people 2 different capabilities from a Blue Sky approach. One is we're looking at the worst of the worst and removing it so no one has to interact or deal with that. And then for the rest of it, we're applying optional labels. That's what Blue Sky does. On top of that, we've called the overall system composable moderation. So you can self-moderate your experience or you can subscribe to additional moderators. This will feel familiar to all of you being at Reddit. I think the difference here is that there is no concept at the moment or very strict concept of subreddits in that you're effectively moderating the entire app simultaneously. So now to drill into some of those a little bit more, one thing I'll signal is, these were all very iterative. The entire app basically only allowed you to do posts about 2 years ago. You literally had the first capability to have posts. So what we're going towards in the future is the ability to have communities, curate those communities, and then moderate those communities. So we're getting more and more towards that in a microblogging format to get towards a world that you'll be more familiar with, but we're not there as yet, and we're making slow progress towards that goal. So from a moderation aspect, my team, I write the policies, we enforce the policies, we implement them. Either it is through manual reports. That was primarily what we did last year. Last year, there was something on the order of 6.5 million reports under a range of policies, and the mods either removed accounts and content or they applied labels. What's interesting about labels, since this isn't used widely across all platforms, is it's a label on content that allows people to see that that content has been labeled by the Blue Sky moderation service. What's interesting about the label aspect is it is optional. So if I label a piece of content as spam, you can go into your moderation settings anywhere on Blue Sky and go through all your label settings and go, hey, I actually am fine. I don't trust your specific definition of spam. So I want this turned off and I want all that content. Because if people are pleading with me for money, for example, continuously, despite the fact that it may be disruptive, I want to see that content. So please feed me that content. You have that control and choice. In addition, you can also just put a warning label so that anytime we apply the label, you can see the label and it's behind an interstitial that you can click through. And then finally, you have the capability to hide that content. So you basically say, we trust these decisions so much you never want to see. That at a fundamental level is what Blue Sky offers. The second component is user controls. So first and foremost, you have the block capability, which has been called by our users the nuclear block. As other platforms are weakening their block capability or lowering the amount of functionality it has, we've gone with you block the user, you don't see the user's content likewise, but it also suppresses all previous interactions you've ever had with that user and makes them invisible to anyone else across the network, which is quite an interesting design choice. But a lot of our users see that as a major attraction from a block setting. In addition to that, you also have the ability to create shareable moderation lists. So at any point, you can go, hey, I find the following users unpleasant. Here's my rationale. Here's a list of accounts. And those are not only blocked to you or muted as you so choose, but anyone else can subscribe to block or mute those users. I will be done this massive monologue soon. And then finally, I guess the point that's of interest is that anyone else can set up their own moderation service. So any user can, at a drop of a hat, turn on any moderation capability they would like and create what we call a labeler. So when you create a labeler, you are basically making moderation decisions for yourself, but you're advertising those. And then any other user can subscribe to those moderation decisions and they will get that. As I rewind back to what Bluesky offers, it is the same thing as providing labels. So you can't delete accounts, you can't take them down, but what you do have is the ability to emit labels, and those labels are custom. So for example, we have the Black community on Bluesky. They operate, or the most well-known labeler in the Black community is called BlackSky. BlackSky has a number of labels. So one of the labels is called Misogynoir. So if you are interested in their labels or are an ally of the Black community, et cetera, you can subscribe to their labeler. You have all the different settings. You can choose to ignore any of their labels. You can choose to get warned, or you can choose to have any content that is labeled by that hidden. Now that could be at the account level or at the post level. And by subscribing to the labeler, you will ingest all their labels as part of your experience. The only other thing I'll get into before I finally stop with this monologue is what are the tools that are available to these people? First off, our moderation tool that we use within Bluesky is called Ozone. So that moderation tool is open source and it's available to anyone who wants to turn on their labeler. We also have cleaner versions for people who want to do ML labels. Like for example, if you want to label everyone that's under a week old, I have a labeler that does that. So if an account is under a week old, it sticks a label on it as a young account. That way you don't want to do a manual click, add a label, et cetera. You just want to omit, hundreds or thousands of labels. So we have automation. We have our rules engine Automod, which is open source, but we're also working with a partner, Roost, to create and launch a number of user-facing tools to enable Bluesky to do a better job, but also have these third-party moderators be enabled to turn on things much more easily and set up much more robust moderation services, but also enable other federated services. And that the goal is so that someone running an ActivityPub instance with 2 to 3 people can easily also set up, a CSAM moderating service in the future, rather than that being a tragedy of the commons. Sorry, that was a very long initial intervention, but hopefully that gives you an overall idea of the ecosystem. I saw a lot of questions and pings in there. So Akash, back to you.
That was a lot. So let me start off with some simple questions. You mentioned that people can publish their own block lists. I could see that as being useful, especially when you have organizations. Let's say you have a human rights organization or an anti-hate organization that might want to publish a list of people that whose content is not so egregious that it's being banned by Blue Sky at a server level, but which, people who subscribe to that organization might feel, I just don't want to see that. So presumably you publish your own block list, people can subscribe to that. Are people doing that? So that potential exists. Have you seen that in action?
Yeah, so it's going fairly well. I wish I had the stats off the top of my head. I can probably dig those up. There's a couple of 100,000 different block lists that are used. So an example of the one you said is this is not an organization. This is a random user in the UK. I think he's called something like Hedgehog Safety. As you can tell, I clearly have no idea who this person is, but that's the interesting thing in this zero trust system. So they set up a system called a block list, I believe it's called a Very British Bigotry, because they're focused on what they see as coming from a UK cultural value, a certain level of bigotry that's specifically associated with trans people, but it's couched in politeness. Again, I'm not saying that this is anything to do with Blue Sky, but that's the whole point of composable moderation, in that I can write rules, I can write protocols, I can write enforcement guidelines. But if someone is, for example, there are organizations that are, from that list perspective, extremely bigoted. And I think that is being one of the big failings of centralized platforms, and that you have one size fits all speech. Yet with this list, that people, have cross-checked, referenced it, argued with it continually, has emerged, totally organically as one of the high credibility lists for this. It's continually finding, assessing people, and blocking them, and people find that to be a highly trusted one if they're interested in not having these users as part of their experience. So that's the whole point and the benefit of it. And we stay pretty much completely out of it unless you violate our rules around labelers and lists, which are usually around toxicity or harassment or things of that nature.
Okay, thank you. On the question of the use of labels, I could imagine the initial use case being labeling spam, for example. You gave that example. I could also imagine people trying to use labels to try to create their own bespoke communities, the equivalent of a subreddit. So if you had some way to tag every post that mentioned cats, you could create the equivalent of a cat subreddit. Does that option exist, or are the labels purely to help you filter out certain kinds of content rather than organize the content?
So we're getting into kind of different feature capabilities in that the moderation capability set is more for content filtration and suppression hiding. That's what it's designed for. It's designed for the moderation capability. When you want to get into the curation capability, we have a different product feature called feeds. So one of the underlying goals of Blue Sky was not, again, to have one size fits all approach where you only get one algorithm. So we actually only have one algorithm that we offer as a company, which is the Discover algorithm, and we're continually working to get it to a pretty decent state. But that's a significant work in progress with a grand total of one person who is dedicated towards making our algorithm good. But the great part about Blue Sky is that you don't have to come and basically eat what the algorithm offers, or you're not trapped with one TV channel. You obviously have a following and chronological feed, but Blue Sky allows you to create as many feeds as you'd like or subscribe to any feeds. So there are feeds for obscure interest categories, fountain pens, moss, cats. There are many, many cat feeds, cat pictures, cat discourse, you name it. So you can come onto Blue Sky and just enter the only communities or curational experiences that, if you will, spark joy in your daily experience. And you can also create those. What we're moving towards is, I don't want to say more like the Reddit experience, but at least from a micro blogging aspect, we're trying to fuse all these eventually into one surface so that you can have the curational aspects of feed interlinked with the moderation aspects, et cetera, so that it all forms part of a community aspect, so that you can have the small s social of being in a smaller space as a bigger space. But these have been challenges with decentralization where everything's locked open to allow people to have that. Right now, we're getting that through other apps, for example. You're able to join Flashes or Skylight or other things and join those communities, but being able to have those small s social on Bluesky, we're not there yet, but we're moving towards it.
Yeah. And the options that allow people to produce their own feeds, I think you use the term composable feeds. How subtle or how nuanced are they? Are they so that you look for specific keywords? Do you do sentiment analysis to, I only want happy posts or I only want angry posts? I'm conscious of the fact that other platforms, when their algorithms are often attuned to the question of how do people respond to certain posts. So Facebook is famous for privileging posts that make people angry because that drives engagement. What kinds of tools are at the disposal of people who want to design their own algorithms?
I would make one argument in Facebook's favor, and perhaps this is the only thing that I will do in Facebook's favor, is it's more the opposite. They're always, always, always optimizing for engagement. By doing so, they, let's say unintentionally, have optimized for things that make people angry, because engagement often is triggered by anger, but hopefully that's the most favorable thing during that. So back to your original question, in that what level of control do you have? You have somewhere in between none and infinite.
Thank you for narrowing that down.
The reason is that you can create a feed, and the challenge is that Bluesky is still fairly rudimentary in many aspects. So you can do as much as you like based on your technical capabilities. So I've seen people use AI to filter down posts that meet their criteria. I've seen people use curational lists. I've seen regex. I've seen Black Sky, for example, curates down members of the Black community that show up in their feed. So you have many different ways to do so. And there's no right or wrong way of doing it. It's really just up to the curator, the level of effort, and really the biggest limitation, unfortunately, is technical capability, because we just don't have the extremely easy multi-click way to generate an extremely custom feed. We had a bunch of third parties that would allow you to do the regex, et cetera, but those are maturing over time.
I see. So people can basically hook in external tools to develop their algorithms, and the limitation isn't on the tools that you will accept; it's on the technical ease or the technical difficulty involved in them creating that process themselves.
Exactly. For example, I've seen, things that filter down only posts related to beans. But in order to do that, they wrote, a an AI filtration tool, which is probably unnecessary for that, which filtered those down. But in doing so, it allowed them to filter down pictures of beans, and identify it, in addition to just doing text analysis, which of course is easier. So the complexity is entirely up to you on how much you want, but the mixed media aspect is really where things get more challenging when you want to distill down things that are movies and images for a specific topic as well.
So to the extent that it requires effort and increasing effort as you want an increasingly sophisticated feed, I wonder about the incentive structure. So with Reddit, the vast majority of our moderators are volunteers. there are tools that are made available by the platform. There are some tools made available by third parties and some tools that are developed internally by Reddit moderators ourselves. But I think most moderators tend to use the tools that are presented to us. If you are currently drawing in people who might be prepared to invest a great deal of time and effort to create these, their bespoke algorithms and feeds, do you have systems to incentivize this? So, for example, can people charge those who want to subscribe to their particular feed as a way of providing enough income so they can continue doing this full time or part time, or to expend the effort required to maintain something that might be sophisticated and therefore effective, but also time consuming and labor intensive?
Yeah, thank you for raising this question. And this is definitely a huge question that's been on my mind. The challenge is finding the time, capacity, and the resources to enable it. Obviously, architecturally, we have built the capabilities to have a decentralized ecosystem of moderation, but from a human perspective, we still haven't figured out how to offset all of the related problems. And I say related problems, some of those being related to monetization, sustainability, exploitation, burnout. And I'll stop there because there's probably at least 10 other related problems that I can bring up. So at the start of the this initiative, what we tried to do was micro grants. So we tried to help people who had kicked off labelers and were trying to get them up and running with, let's say, $500 grants to enable them to set up their ecosystem, this, that. It wouldn't fund salaries per se, but at the very least, it would enable them to mitigate some of their costs. This also being us with pre-revenue, we were kind of melting our entire savings very rapidly last year as we grew. It was great and terrifying simultaneously. So moving forward, we're trying to achieve a couple of things at once. The first is we're trying to introduce monetization into the system. Now, just before I get into this, I think the big point I should raise is everything can change. So none of this is fixed in stone, and the arguments, the discussion we have flows dynamically, continually. But essentially, why don't I get to our end state rather than going through? What we want is we want to create an ecosystem where money transfers are part of the system so that we can reward the labor that goes into enabling the overall system. One of the challenges in centralized platforms is that they reward creators, and they're significantly looking at content creation as the one thing that they're trying to enable. People who engage with sticky content that's created by creators are what they're seeking. So then they inject money into the people creating the content, and that's how the ecosystem thrives. Bluesky, we're basically looking at a more complex scenario in that the overall ecosystem thrives based on a number of contributions. And these can be both content creation, but maybe that's also feed curation. Maybe that's also list management, maybe that is labeler subscriptions. So what we're trying to move towards, and I think that's a better approach to say our end state, is we're trying to monetize in a way that can monetize all these different layers to say that, hey, if you come to Bluesky and you're part of this experience, you enjoy this experience, and you'd like to inject money into this experience, okay, ideally some of it comes back to Bluesky so they can justify, launching a company, et cetera. But then how do we share that money either directly so that maybe we only get a small cut of it, or you pay us and we disperse it to the ones who use the most. So these are the different discussions we're having, where we we're looking at many things. It could be a nomination system for the top services you use, the top creators you subscribe to, etc. So now I'm getting into the debate side, but at least I'll start with, this is what we're trying to do. We're looking at how do you enable the overall ecosystem as opposed to only creators create content. So that's where we're sinking all our money into.
It's really interesting. I mean, I can't think of a platform that does monetize or reward sound curation and moderation as much as we all, especially as Reddit moderators, would say that that is key to making a humane and viable platform. Let me ask one final question before we turn towards questions from my colleagues. It's about verification. This goes beyond moderating content and posts and more towards assessing the contributors, the people making the post. So I find it interesting that Bluesky has recently launched its own verification model, but it's one that is somewhat decentralized in that Bluesky will verify accounts and in some cases empower those accounts to verify others so that there's a cascade effect rather than having verification run entirely centrally. Tell us a bit about how that's unfolding. I know it's very new, but how is that working?
So what I don't want to pretend to audiences like yourselves who get into this is that there's a single right answer. We debated this endlessly because Bluesky being decentralized, the system actually wanted to go with a decentralized way of doing verification. So the way the engineers, the technical experts came up with is like a series of social vouches where I vouch for you, you vouch for me, et cetera. And we continue to vouch for people. And then the more vouches you collected within a certain community, then you were considered credible within the community. And we took that proposal out to users and they hated it. So, well, you live, you learn. So one of the interesting pieces of feedback is while I wouldn't count myself as, but most of the company are kind of decentralization nerds, they really wanted a very decentralized approach to verification. But the problem is users still extremely anchor on models that were first adopted, i.e. the blue check model of Twitter, or the pay-to-play model that so many others have gone towards. As a result of all that feedback, we've gone to a much more limited approach. So it is only sprinkle of decentralization compared to where we were starting, which is genuinely user-to-user vouching. But users just did not connect or get that model. We thought we're still thinking of doing it within communities, which I think is an interesting one. So when we launched the community concept, rather than the community leaders having to manually curate the model, what if you just get vouchers within the community? What if you get a certain amount of vouchers from the Black community? So we haven't fully let go of that model. And if someone said, yes, anyone can actually verify anyone else on Bluesky, it just doesn't count unless effectively I do it. So what we have gone is you have the standard old school style verification that operated on Twitter back in the day, which is I look an account and go, is it authentic? Is it genuinely representing a person or an org? And is it notable? If those two things qualify, boom, you get a check mark. Then you have the second capability, which is trusted verifiers, which is huge risk, where I go out and I give anyone the ability to verify anyone else. Largely, this has been limited to large orgs because it's so high risk from my perspective. The second someone goes and compromises one of those accounts, I'm going to be in a world of pain. And, I like my blood pressure to not go higher than it currently is. So I have largely started in this round with going with large organizations with a lot of affiliates. Take Washington Post. I give them trusted verifier status, and then they can find any of their journalists and anyone else that counts as an affiliate. It could be the Washington Post opinion section, et cetera, and it can stick verification labels without my intervention on any of those. And that's how we've kind of allowed it. future states of Blue Sky where we have more security, more ID verification built in, things of that nature, limit the risk associated with that, which would or may allow us to scale it out to a wider audience. But at the moment, I'm keeping it fairly limited. So hopefully that covered some of the bases, with the caveats that this was not the model that we initially hoped to start with.
Well, life rarely ends up the way we imagine it. But from a Reddit perspective, I think that when we tend to think about models of verification, we are less concerned with notability and more concerned with authenticity. Is this a real person rather than is this an important person? And from that perspective, the idea of having highly distributed verification seems really interesting to me because any system is open to abuse. But if you have someone who is trustworthy and they're not making a subjective decision, is this an important person, however you define that, but they're making an objective decision, is there actually a human being as distinct from a bot behind that? That does feel like the kind of thing that can be shared, thus distributed and thus spreading the load. But with that in mind, I will turn to Ipona for our questions from our colleagues. Ipona, what do you have for us?
Sorry. First, I just wanted to say that I loved your point where you said that we're more concerned with is it a real person versus an important person? I think that's huge. But let's see.